Our story begins with a rebirth, where the first thing he did was swallow a stone in front of everyone. He then forced the woman who loved him deeply to swallow a bamboo viper. Naturally, everyone thought he was insane, but they had no idea that in less than a minute, every living being on Earth would mutate. Every human was about to receive supernatural talents based entirely on the last thing they had eaten. In his previous life, he had eaten lamb buns before the mutation arrived, so he only awakened the talent for growing long hair. At first, during the severe weather, using mental energy to create sheep's wool was actually quite useful. But as the mutated monsters grew stronger, he truly became nothing more than a lamb waiting for the slaughter. In this life, however, having been reborn, he has already made all the necessary preparations. In his past life, he had seen a giant python with bone plates, which was actually a transformation of a stray dog owned by an antique shopkeeper. Out of curiosity, he learned from the owner that the stray dog had been trying to protect him. It had happened when the dog accidentally swallowed a specific piece of jade. After his rebirth, the very first thing he did was track down that antique shop in the south of the city. After scraping his resources together, he managed to buy that exact piece of jade from the shop. As for why he forced Xia Banru to swallow her pet viper, it is because his classmate, Xia Banru, truly loves him. In his previous life, even during the apocalypse, Xia Banru never once abandoned him. She had awakened an ice and snow talent that was more than enough to keep herself safe. She could have survived perfectly well in the apocalyptic wasteland, yet she chose to follow him loyally. She protected him, a nobody with a useless talent, until finally, because he was such a burden, they both perished in agony. Now that he is reborn, he is determined to help her. He wants her to awaken a much stronger talent using her pet, this very bamboo viper. This was, after all, the hard-won wisdom gathered by humanity during his previous life. As it turns out, swallowing the source of a talent directly yields the most powerful results. And if it weren't for his own dragon line jade, things would be quite different. Ordinary human strength wouldn't even be able to make a dent in it. Even as a lesser dragon, it is many times stronger than the ice talent Xia Banru possessed before. We return to the present, where she is faced with his unwavering insistence. Xia Banru's expression was a complex map of confusion and devotion. On one hand, there was the boy she had loved for years. On the other, her beloved pet. Deep down, her heart was caught in an agonizing conflict. But looking at his persistent gaze, Xia Banru finally made her choice. She whispered an apology to Xiaoqing, deciding that for him, she would do anything. Xia Banru took the snake, pinched its head, and ate it right there in front of the class. She swallowed it down like a bowl of noodles, proving she was just as crazy as he was. The entire classroom was so stunned that not a single person could find their voice. They could only watch in shock, feeling as though the world itself had gone mad. A moment later, Xia Banru rushed desperately toward the water dispenser. She drank several glasses frantically, leaning against the wall and retching as the class finally reacted. They cried out in disbelief, convinced that Xia Banru had truly lost her mind. They couldn't believe she actually ate it just because he asked. It felt like a fever dream. Even the teacher couldn't recover from the shock, unable to grasp the logic of today's youth. Amidst the clamor of the crowd, Chen Jie finally reached Xia Banru's side, who at that moment looked as delicate as a fallen fairy. Her face, usually of incomparable beauty, was deathly pale, with sweat from extreme mental anguish clinging to her forehead. She looked to be in unbearable pain, clutching her stomach as she tried to endure the internal agony. He pulled her into his arms, feeling a surge of relief. He had actually done it. Xia Banru groaned in pain, her hand instinctively reaching out to grip his waist as he gently kissed her pale cheek. Blood began to trickle from the corners of her mouth as she tried to speak, a sight that terrified the teacher into calling emergency services. Meanwhile, Gao Juanao, the class sycophant who had spent years fruitlessly chasing Xia Banru, felt his world shatter in an instant. An overwhelming rage clouded his vision. He was a tall, sturdy young man who had spent years building his physique. With his muscles tensed and his temper flaring, he immediately stomped his foot and charged forward toward the pair. He screamed that Chen Jie deserved to die, knowing full well how much he had always cared for her. His roar, demanding to know why he forced her to eat a snake, was like a thunderclap that shocked the classroom into silence. And yet, Chen Jie didn't even spare Gao Juanao a glance, simply holding the weakening Xia Banru while checking the time on his phone. Gao Juanao shoved his way through the crowd, rushing toward him with pure, unadulterated fury. 3. He held Xia Banru tight and began a quiet countdown, watching the charging boy without moving a single muscle. 2. The towering figure was nearly upon him, and many in the room unconsciously held their breath in anticipation of the impact. 1. As the clock struck exactly 10, a beam of light packed with immense energy suddenly exploded outside the window. The dazzling flash was so bright it nearly blinded everyone, though the phenomenon lasted only a fleeting moment before dissipating. Gao Juanao, caught mid-charge, collapsed heavily to the floor, his eyes temporarily useless from the sudden glare. Following the explosion of light, an invisible electromagnetic storm was set to occur in just a matter of seconds. It was a force that would soon engulf the entire solar system, and in that moment, everyone instinctively turned to look out the window. but they found nothing. Most of the people quickly regained their composure, assuming it was nothing of importance. Only a few began searching for news online, only to discover that their phones had no signal at all. Gao Juanao also scrambled up from the floor, charging toward Chen Jia once again in a fit of rage. He was determined that today, he would finally vent all his anger on Banru's behalf. The tension was murderous. After all, Gao Juanao exercised year-round and was a hulking man of nearly 2 meters. With his muscles bulging, all the classmates began to pray silently in their hearts for poor Chen Jia. And yet, just as that massive fist was about to strike him, a sudden change occurred. The sky, which had been so bright just moments ago, turned from day to night in a matter of seconds. A beam of blood-red light suddenly plummeted from the heavens above. The solar storm had caused this chaos, forcing the very color of the sky to shift before our eyes. Just as this vision emerged, Xia Banru let out a soul-piercing scream from within his arms. Everyone instinctively turned toward her, the girl who had swallowed the Zuiakin and whose face remained deathly pale. In that moment, she was caught in the grip of something strange, and her appearance began to change drastically. A pair of dragon horns suddenly sprouted from the top of her head. Silver arcs of energy flickered around her beautiful cheeks, which were now covered in blue and white scales. A set of pointed, scaly armor began to manifest along the length of her back. A small dragon made of blue smoke swirled around her, lashing out at the air. A long dress of blue and white scale armor radiated a faint light, tightly outlining her slender figure from top to bottom. Behind her, a blue and white dragon tail swayed slowly, making her look like a frost saint from a television epic. Following this transformation, the details of her new reality immediately flooded into Xia Banru's mind. In this moment, the delicate Xia Banru began to vaguely understand the purpose behind making her swallow that object just moments ago. It had been entirely for her own sake, and now, we see she was completely devoted to Chen Jia. Because of this, she naturally couldn't tolerate anyone daring to provoke him. She stepped in front of him and simply extended her palm, easily blocking the attack. Gao Juanao's massive fist was not only stopped in its tracks, but the moment it struck Xia Banru's palm, it was scorched by the layer of divine shielding covering her scale armor treasure. At that point, Gao Juanao immediately let out a cry of pure agony. His palm was already charred, his right hand, emitting puffs of blue smoke, throbbed with pain as he desperately searched for water. He poured it over his hand, while the scales on Xia Banru's cheeks gradually faded back beneath her skin. The dragon horns on her head also retracted quickly, and she returned to her original state. She waited anxiously for him to praise her, but Chen Jie's expression hadn't changed at all. Even so, Xia Banru felt a distinct trembling in her soul whenever she faced him. It was the primal fear found in the depths of a weak creature's genes when standing before the heavens and the earth. She had her suspicions. Perhaps, as he had mentioned before, he had already swallowed something similar himself. Xia Banru didn't know exactly what it was, but the urge to submit in body and soul only made her love for him grow deeper. She didn't know how she understood everything about this mutation, but she knew deep down he wouldn't hurt her. After all, her current power was a gift he had personally bestowed upon her. Just then, a stellar red light began to pour in through the window. It grew even brighter, illuminating the night like a brilliant crimson day, and almost at the same time, Gao Juanao's screaming came to an abrupt and total halt. After a momentary pause, the classroom began to echo once again. Cries of pain rang out from many confused people, all affected by that strange celestial light. They began to scream in a blind panic, and for a moment, the scene became utterly chaotic just as the stellar red light faded. A giant, grotesque figure, covered in blood with bones piercing through its own body, suddenly appeared in the classroom. And beneath this massive figure, 2 people were being crushed, both completely drenched in blood. The rest of the survivors sat on the floor, paralyzed by terror, staring in horror at those 2. We see bodies that were once human, now twitching and convulsing constantly. And that bloody, terrifying giant seemed to be making wet, rhythmic chewing noises. Among the rest of the crowd, even more ghostly figures were now mixed in. Some were thin as phantom monkeys, others twisted like worms or hunched like old men, but they all shared one common trait. Every single one of them had raw, exposed flesh where their skin should have been. With terrifying and grotesque appearances, like demons crawling out of hell, they were now all hunting the students. Ordinary students in the classroom were being chased by sharp claws and jagged fangs, tearing into anyone they caught. They were devoured bloodily on the spot, right inside the classroom that had been only slightly messy moments before. A horrible massacre unfolded, indistinguishable from hell itself, as the class representative, Zanja, watched the scene in a daze. She couldn't fully grasp what had happened. Why, after 2 flashes of light, had the entire world changed so drastically? What she didn't know was that those lights and electromagnetic storms contained a strange, ancient power. When combined, they triggered a mutation. Only those with a mind firm enough to resist those strange powers could survive. Instead of eroding, they would awaken transcendental abilities based on the external objects they had ingested into their bodies. In other words, their unique divine weapons. Gao Juanao, clearly, did not have a firm enough mind in his dazed state. He also failed to resist the invasion of that strange power, an unusually violent energy that quickly flooded every corner of his body. Threads of undulating blood began to seep from beneath his skin, scratching and contracting constantly against his flesh. His once normal skin was soon covered by countless fine, crimson threads. It was simply rampant blood, yet in just 2 or 3 seconds, Gao Juanao's figure had withered to nearly half its size. The entire person was drenched in blood, completely unrecognizable, and slipping once again into a truly bizarre state. Contorted into a posture no human could ever achieve, he almost seemed to condense into a braid after a series of violent distortions. Sharp avian claws sprouted from his feet, accompanied by a predatory shriek that nearly shattered the eardrums of everyone nearby. Even Gao Juanao, or what was left of him, twisted his body to pounce on the girl standing right in front of him. His speed was so immense it left afterimages, and in an instant, he tore a girl in half with a single claw. The class representative, Zanja, backed away repeatedly as she watched the humanoid avian creature howling over the corpse. We see his pupils shrink slightly. It was a demonic blood crow, a creature of nightmares. But one has to wonder, how exactly did this mutated beast emerge from Gao Juanao's very body? In his previous life, on the day the mutation began, he hadn't gone to school due to an excused absence. Naturally, he had avoided this scarlet display before. He, a man who has now been reborn twice. He knew, of course, that many different types of monsters appeared immediately after the mutation occurred. This avian monster Gao Juanao had transformed into, known as a demonic blood crow, is merely a first-level creature. However, its speed is incredibly fast, and its claws are like razors, especially in these early stages of the mutation. To be perfectly honest, they are among the most ferocious and deadly monsters one could encounter right now. Even if the humans in this initial stage manage to survive the first wave of the transformation, and even if they successfully activate their innate abilities, they still need enough time to actually learn how to use them. If they cross paths with the demonic blood crow and its terrifying speed, they might not even have time to release their innate ability before receiving a bone-chilling blow. Only those gifted with top-tier skills, capable of grasping the situation in an instant and using their innate powers, stand any real chance of survival. As for the ordinary people who have already transformed into first-level monsters, they have no hope of escaping their inevitable fate. All that remains of them is an extremely faint, flickering red starlight. The owl-like traits of the demonic blood crow make it even more lethal and skilled when hunting in the darkness. At the start of his awakening in his previous life, he hadn't mastered his skills, and his neighbors had nearly driven him out like a monster. If Siaban Ro hadn't followed him with such determination after the mutation, he might have died outside, but fortunately, he was safe at home. He found himself wondering again and again, what truly is this demonic blood crow, and what does its presence signify for them all? This realization helped him understand why, in his previous life, almost no one from their class made it out of the school alive. While these thoughts flashed through his mind, he watched the blood crow cautiously, all while attempting to awaken his own innate supernatural power. And then, just like that, the information regarding his specific talent manifested clearly within his mind. His eyes lit up immediately. He realized the demonic blood crow was the perfect subject to test his newfound strength. He took a firm step forward, and suddenly, a brilliant golden light began to radiate from his entire body. A black and gold flying fish mask covered his face, while golden tassels trailed behind his head like flickering flames. Plates of black and gold armor, resembling dragon scales, covered him completely, making his tall figure appear even more imposing and powerful. On his back, intricate cyan and purple patterns adorned the thin armor, making him look like an unstoppable warrior god. He had summoned the Tizen armor. Nearby, Sia Banru watched him, holding her breath with a look of pure admiration in her eyes. Even the monsters that his former classmates had become seemed to stare at him, as if they had found a glimmer of great hope. He stood in the school hall as they all lunged at him. The closest was a giant fish monster, standing nearly 4 meters tall. The beast was eager to strike the man in the Tizen armor, but when their eyes met, its lingering human memories seemed to stir. It awakened a hidden fear within the beast, and the grotesque, twisted monster roared in fury as it charged straight toward him. Seeing this, Sia Banru was about to step in and help, but he stopped her with a simple wave of his hand. And then, Sia Banru watched as he ran headlong toward the massive fish monster. In the blink of an eye, the two figures, one giant and one small, collided, sending an invisible shockwave rippling through the air. At the same time, the ground beneath them buckled under their immense power, forming a jagged crack in the floor. Even in his Tizen armor, standing nearly 2 meters tall, he still looked like a child compared to the 4-meter-high fish monster. The sheer difference in size forced his body toward the broken ground, making it seem as though he were losing the battle of strength. Meanwhile, the demonic blood moon crow, the creature Gao who had become, watched from above. The creature was cunning. Sensing the fish monster had the upper hand, it shrieked and lunged toward the two combatants. But right at that moment, he took a calculated, diagonal step backward. With a sudden reversal of movement, he shifted from pushing to pulling, hoisting the 4-meter giant off the ground and slamming it into the crow. The massive fish monster was sent flying directly toward the pouncing demonic blood moon bird. The dull thud of colliding flesh and the sound of shattering walls echoed through the hall one after another. The ugly, enormous body of the fish monster was smashed into the wall, nearly pinning the blood crow behind it. As the fish monster slumped away from the wall, the demonic blood moon crow began to roar with absolute fury. Relying on its unnatural agility, the bird had used its wings to leap over the crashing fish monster just before the impact. The demonic blood moon crow beat its massive wings, hovering with a menacing grace. On its eerie, human-like face, its eyeballs rolled and twitched as if it were actually calculating its next move. Realizing that its strength alone couldn't shake the human in the black and gold armor, the crow began to let out a series of piercing screams. Chen Jie understood immediately. It wasn't just a roar of anger, but a bloodline call to summon every half-transformed monster in the area. To launch a coordinated attack on Chen Jie, we see the once cautious monsters begin to writhe, their bodies twisting as they grow even more ferocious. Their faces contorted into even more terrifying masks of rage as they let out a chorus of furious, bone-chilling roars. In an instant, several of the monsters simultaneously dropped the raw meat they had been clutching in their maws. They all lunged at Chen Jie at once, while the demonic blood moon crow took the opportunity to fly silently toward the ceiling. Sensing the sneak attack, Chen Jie let out a low grunt and clenched his right hand into the air as red and purple light flared behind him. Suddenly, a massive wind axe shimmering with black and gold light manifested, the divine Tai artifact, the Kaitian axe. Faced with the onslaught of these repulsive creatures, Chen Jie didn't retreat. Instead, he stepped forward and slammed his foot into the ground. He charged toward the four monsters like a brewing storm, his body twisting with unnatural grace through the air. The giant axe in his hand began to spin as if in a deadly dance, and as it rotated, it seemed to pull away from the very earth. The moon angel rose from the ground and ascended toward the sky, accompanied by a roar as steady and resonant as a mountain. Then, with a sudden flash of blinding light, all four of the aberrant monsters were sliced clean in half at almost exactly the same moment. High above, the demonic blood moon crow watched the carnage unfold. Sensing its life was in imminent danger, it let out a final howl and dove toward Chen Jie, desperate to fight to the bitter end. But Chen Jie simply allowed a small smirk to play on his lips before swinging his axe upward in a sudden, violent arc. A brilliant light erupted from the blade, amplifying infinitely as it tore through the air. And just like that, the demonic blood moon crow was sliced right down the middle by Chen Jie's strike. With a single, decisive blow, Chen Jie had brought the creature's reign of terror to a definitive end. The entire classroom suddenly fell into a heavy, absolute silence. His classmates stood there, completely stunned by the display, while the remaining monsters finally realized the true power of Chen Jie's lineage. He radiated a powerful aura, and we see every single one of them stop what they were doing to stare at Chen Jie. Chen Jie didn't hesitate for a single second, leaping forward with a speed that was almost blinding. He moved directly to kill the remaining monsters, and in just 3 minutes, it was over. The aberrant beasts that had occupied the classroom were no more. They had been completely wiped out, and it was at this exact moment that the survivors in the room began to make noise, desperate to escape. But Chen Jie walked toward the podium with an icy expression. He told them all to shut up, and his voice was enough to make the classroom fall silent instantly. The end of the world has arrived, he warned them, and now everyone outside is a monster. If you want to live, listen to me, he said. But just as he finished, a massive hellhound opened its grotesque maw at the door. Baring its fangs and flicking its tongue, it glared at everyone in the room while letting out a deep, guttural roar. As the survivors tried to flee the room in terror, a girl in the crowd reached her breaking point. She let out a piercing scream, crying out in horror at the sight of the hellhound. The beast suddenly became manic, and Chen Jie frowned, his eyes locking onto the creature outside the door. This creature had been hunting and evolving throughout the school, and finally, it had transformed into a 3-headed hellhound, becoming the undisputed overlord of Cloud City. To be perfectly honest, if it weren't for a high-level transcendent appearing later, the entire city would have eventually become nothing more than its personal buffet. This time, however, Chen Jie didn't plan to handle it himself. Instead, he gave Xia Banru a knowing look. Seeing Chen Jie's signal, Xia Banru began to concentrate the extinction lightning within her palm. With a fleeting shadow and a cold huff, she prepared to strike. Quite unexpectedly, a bolt of divine lightning strikes the hellhound with incredible force. As the dust clears, we see a scorched, blackened mark appearing on the beast's massive body. It was exactly what one would expect from the famous divine annihilation of his previous life. It was a power specialized in subduing these wicked hounds, but this time, the creature is purely furious as it drags its burnt frame forward. Opening its enormous maw with a bone-chilling howl, the beast lunges directly into the classroom. A cloud of black smoke is exhaled, instantly turning everything it touches to ash, including the two people standing by the desk. They are reduced to nothing but dust in a matter of seconds. Calling the beast out for courting death, Chun Jie realizes the hellhound is actually capable of resisting Xia Banru's divine power. And so, he plans to take matters into his own hands, letting his heaven-defying divine weapon, the Pangu axe, take the lead. Whistling through the air, the axe flies toward the hellhound with Chun Jie following closely behind. He charges at the monster, and although the hellhound nimbly dodges the initial strike of the Pangu axe, Chun Jie is right there, and like a wild bull, he slams into the beast and tackles it directly to the ground. Xia Banru, watching from the side, quickly hands the weapon back to Chun Jie's waiting grasp. To be honest, Chun Jie had no intention of giving the hellhound even a single chance to counterattack. It is an instant death. Afterward, Chun Jie walks over to the hellhound's corpse and cuts it open. From within the body, he pulls out a white gold ingot, a prize he remembers well from his previous life. In those times, the Transcendents referred to this type of gold ingot as Ling-yin. Whenever a Transcendent absorbs the Ling-yin, they are granted a precious opportunity to advance their power. It is, as we learn, the fastest and most stable way to grow stronger in this new world. But of course, not every mutant beast is kind enough to produce these gold ingots. Only a select few are capable of producing even low-level Ling-yin from the corpses of these mutant beasts. As for the high-level ones, well, they are rarer still. However, there is a pattern. The higher the quality of Ling-yin contained within, the more unique the beast's body becomes. Consequently, the physical form of such a mutant beast is considered a true rarity. The world has become quite cruel, governed strictly by the law of the jungle. Even the strong find there are always those stronger coming to hunt them down. Remembering his previous life, he recalled how Xia Banru had never once given up on him. Thinking that he had already awakened the Pan Wu lineage talent, Chun Jie decided to give this Ling-yin to her. He took Xia Banru to a secluded spot where they were alone, and she began to absorb it with her mind. Xia Banru took the Ling-yin and, without a moment's hesitation, did exactly as Chun Jie instructed. The light gradually dispersed, and soon the Ling-yin in Xia Banru's hands had completely vanished. Afterward, Xia Banru appeared remarkably refreshed and refined. We see her skin has grown paler, her eyes clearer, and her long hair. It had become darker and more lustrous, giving her an even more noble aura than before. And this was merely the outward appearance. The real increase was in her inherent talent and abilities. The boost was even greater than expected, reaching the second awakening right at the start of this global shift. The strength of a second-level awakener was already enough to handle the majority of crises. Meanwhile, Chun Jie walked toward the girl who had screamed earlier. She was the one who had attracted the hellhounds, and with one swift movement, the girl's her head rolled directly onto the floor as Chun Jie looked around at the others with a fierce, warning gaze. In the apocalypse, people must pay the price for their own stupidity. As for the survivors at the scene, there were fewer than 15 people left. Chun Jie, they told him, we will listen to you now. Whatever you want us to do, we'll do it. At that exact moment, a miserable cry for help echoed from outside the classroom. Help me, please, somebody help me. The desperate plea for aid mingled with the roars of exotic beasts, resonating through the halls. Chun Jie knew what this meant. The beasts in the school had already begun to gather in packs. He remembered his previous life and how the school fell because too many students transformed into monsters. And because of that, a literal army of exotic monsters had begun to emerge. Even though the current Chun Jie had already awakened his talent, he was still powerless to face thousands of these exotic beasts all at once. Making a decisive choice, Chun Jie immediately moved to shut the classroom door. Don't just stand there like fools, he told them. Hurry up and start tearing up the tables and chairs. Block the windows and the doors. Chun Jie shouted loudly to the crowd huddled in the corner. After a brief hesitation, the instinct for survival spurred several people to stand up and follow his instructions. They worked to block the doors and windows, but then someone realized it was Xiao Wei out there. As the army of beasts drew closer, the class beauty, Xiao Qianqian, recognized Xiao Wei at the very front of the pack. The boy fleeing for his life was her roommate and best friend. At this moment, we see Xiao Wei outside the school building. To be perfectly honest, he didn't have a single inch of his body left intact. The sight of his bloodied, battered state caused Xiao Qianqian's compassion to overflow instantly. In a heartbeat, Xiao Qianqian reached the classroom door and stretched out her hands. She was preparing to shove aside the table they had just used to block the entrance. But right at that moment, Chun Jie appeared at her side with startling speed. Grabbing her firmly and gritting his teeth, he asked if she wanted everyone there to die with him. Chun Jie's voice was icy as a pair of powerful hands intervened. He tightly gripped Xiao Qianqian's wrist, stopping her in her tracks. She demanded to know what he meant, insisting she couldn't just stand by while Xiao Wei was about to die. The world had changed, and the old human order had already collapsed into ruins. Any mistake could result in death, or even worse, it could lead to the deaths of everyone else. He knew that to be a hero in this world, one must first be powerful enough to save themselves. Seeing that Chun Jie wouldn't let go, Xiao Qianqian flared up with a mix of rage and embarrassment. She yelled at him, asking how he could possibly be so cold and heartless. The corner of Chun Jie's mouth twisted into a grim, knowing smile. Fine, he told her, since she was so convinced that he was the cold one. Then she was more than welcome to go out there and play Mother Teresa herself. With those words, Chun Jie immediately took action to prove his point. Calling her far too naive, he threw open the door and pushed Xiao Qianqian out into the hall. He then calmly shut the door. Standing in the hallway, Xiao Qianqian was suddenly struck by terror. She began pounding on the door frantically, crying out that she had been wrong. Even Chun Jie, despite his cold exterior, had been feeling a sense of growing impatience just a moment ago. Xiao Qianqian begged him to let her back in, but the monsters in the hallway had already spotted the weeping girl. Suddenly, their pupils burned a deep red with pure greed, and they lunged toward her without a second thought. Meanwhile, the others inside the classroom fell into a deathly silence, trembling as they huddled in the corners. They listened to the horrific sounds of the alien beasts biting and fighting in the hallway, not daring to make a sound. Chun Jie stood just behind the door, his expression tense and his body coiled like a spring. He knew that if a mutating monster were to burst through, he would have to fight to the very death. In the worst-case scenario, he still intended to find a way to escort Xiao Qianqian to safety. But outside, after the monsters had finished devouring her, the hallway suddenly fell into an eerie, heavy silence. The students whispered, wondering what was happening and why everything had become so quiet all of a sudden. They allowed themselves a flicker of hope, wondering if the monsters had finally left and if they were saved. One student whimpered about wanting to go home and find their mother, a natural reaction in such a nightmare. The classmates looked at one another, mistakenly believing they had finally found a desperate chance to survive. And yet, they remained exactly where they were, too terrified to actually make a move. Based on the brutal lessons they had just learned, the idea of simply going home felt like a distant dream. Now, they realized that if they wanted to stay alive, they would have to rely entirely on Chun Jie. Chun Jie cautiously peered through the small glass window of the classroom door to see what was happening. Through the glass, he saw the grim reality. Xiao Qianqian had been completely devoured by the monsters. Nothing remained of her in the hallway except for a dark, spreading pool of blood. As for the monsters, in that moment, we see them all miraculously levitating in place, trembling with fear. It was as if they were terrified of something, which, following the natural course of things, these monsters shouldn't be. After devouring Xiao Qianqian, their next logical objective should have been the people inside the classroom. Instead of staying calm while they remained still, Chun Jie felt his nerves fraying, wondering what on earth was happening. A wave of doubt washed over him because, in his previous life, he hadn't been at school when the apocalypse began. He was uncertain about what would happen next, and deep down, a growing sense of crisis began to take hold. One of the girls whispered, asking Chun Jie what was happening outside. She gripped the long sword in her hand tightly, her knuckles turning white from the strain. If the situation turned dire, she was fully prepared to be the first one to charge out there. To protect Chun Jie, she watched him closely as he turned his head to look toward the center of the room. He simply shook his head, admitting that he didn't know the answer yet. He told her not to move just yet, suggesting they wait and see what would unfold. Hardly had Chun Jie finished speaking when, outside the classroom, something began to stir. Step, step, step. Strange footsteps were slowly approaching the classroom's location. With every heavy step, it felt as though a hammer was striking the hearts of everyone present. A voice called out, inviting the classmates to come out and play, claiming she had been waiting for them. The voice added that she was even willing to share something delicious with all of them. We hear a female voice echoing through the hallway, beckoning them to come closer. The voice was unnervingly deep, the kind of sound that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. The students recognized it as Zhao Xiaolu, but she was supposed to have taken the day off. The classmates looked at one another, confused as to why she would have returned in the middle of this nightmare. Gao Xiaoli spoke, her voice trembling and her expression twisted in pure panic. It seems the sudden appearance of Zhao Xiaolu had caught her completely off guard. She wondered how she had even arrived, and more importantly, why she didn't seem to fear the monsters outside. A terrifying thought crossed her mind. What if she had turned into a monster like Gao Juanao just to seek revenge? She told herself that if Zhao was looking for someone, it should be Gao Xiaoli. It was none of her business. Yes, they reasoned it was all because Gao Xiaoli had bullied her, so they surely had nothing to do with it. We see the girls who used to share a dormitory with Zhao Xiaolu looking particularly uneasy. They began to whisper among themselves, and it's clear they had treated Zhao Xiaolu quite poorly in the past. With a look of sheer terror, she could only let out heavy, ragged breaths. Suddenly, the classroom door was struck violently 3 times, echoing through the silence. Chun Jie tightened his grip on the disc axe, his knuckles white as he prepared for the worst. To be honest, it didn't matter to him if Zhao Xiaolu was coming for revenge or something else entirely. If she dared to attack him or Xia Banru, Chun Jie wouldn't hesitate for a single second. He was fully prepared to take her head, and then, we realize she is finally here. She was coming. Gao Xiaoli clutched her head with both hands and curled into a ball in the corner of the room. The voice outside called out, asking her dear friends to please open the door. She asked if they didn't enjoy playing with her anymore, wondering why they wouldn't let her in now. Then, Zhao Xiaolu let out a soft, chilling laugh. But the sound was deeply unsettling, high-pitched and sharp, like a cat scratching its claws against a chalkboard. The pounding continued until, with a sudden snap, the lock on the classroom door finally gave way. She's coming in, Chun Jie whispered softly to Xiao Banru, his voice barely audible. And then, in the very next instant, the classroom door was violently thrown open with a deafening crash. A massive, hulking monster now stood blocking the entrance to the room. The upper half of its body belonged to Zhao Xiaolu, though she was now dressed in little more than rags. Her hair was wild and disheveled, and the teeth in her mouth had already sharpened into giant, jagged fangs. A pair of glowing red eyes glared with pure fury at her former classmates cowering inside. The lower half of her body had completely transformed, splitting into 8 uneven and twisted pig-like legs. Dark blue veins pulsed across them, and her toenails shifted, sharpening into blades as thin as razors. Hee, I see you, Zhao Xiaolu laughed, her voice sounding nothing like a human's anymore. Then, all 8 legs moved in unison, and in a sudden flash, she came charging into the classroom. After her mutation, Zhao Xiaolu was several times her original size, and the moment she entered, she occupied more than half the room. Xiaolu, please, forgive me, a voice cried out. Gao Xiaoli, realizing there was nowhere left to run, dropped directly to her knees before the monster. Forgive you? Did you think of today back then? Now, that I should forgive you, what a hilarious joke. Zhao Xiaolu's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated madness. Her body trembled constantly as she recalled the pain she endured, a memory that fueled her fractured mind. And now, finally, she possessed the power to exact her long-awaited revenge. Deep down, she felt an incomparable sense of excitement at the prospect. Yes, she was the one who did it, one of Gao Xiaoli's roommates shouted, betraying her as she edged toward the door. You cannot escape, Zhao Xiaolu replied, her gaze turning cold and predatory. With a heavy thud, the door slammed shut automatically in an instant. Chun Jie couldn't help but feel a surge of surprise as he watched this unfold. It seemed Zhao Xiaolu must have consumed a spider to trigger this mutation, yet she could already use mental power to manipulate objects. Presumably, she was already approaching the very peak of the first level. Zhao Xiaolu didn't notice Chun Jie's gaze. In a flash, she reached the girl trying to escape and snatched her up instantly. She tore the girl's body in two, grabbing one half and shoving it into her mouth to begin chewing. This bloody scene caused many of the classmates to feel physically ill on the spot. I'll fight you, Gao Xiaoli cried out, finding courage from who knows where as she grabbed a table leg from the floor. She rushed toward Zhao Xiaolu and swung the table leg against her with all her might. However, it was as if she had struck nothing at all. The blow caused no damage. Instead, the impact simply vibrated through the table leg. Everything fell to the floor, and Zhao Xiaolu, sensing the attack, laughed as she lifted Gao Xiaoli into the air out of nowhere. You're far too impatient. Now it's your turn, Zhao Xiaolu said with chilling cruelty. Then, she began to bring Gao Xiaoli toward her mouth, inch by agonizing inch. A powerful telekinesis held Gao Xiaoli trapped, no matter how desperately she struggled to break free. It was entirely useless, and Gao Xiaoli began to cough up blood. Her piercing, soul-shattering scream echoed throughout the entire classroom. After about 10 seconds, Zhao Xiaolu had consumed the majority of Gao Xiaoli's body. However, it appeared her appetite was far from satisfied. She had no intention of leaving. Instead, she turned her greedy gaze toward Chun Jie and Xiao Banru. You two look delicious, Zhao Xiaolu hissed, the words dripping from the corners of her mouth. A grim smile spread across her face, her lips still stained with fresh, crimson blood. She fixed a fierce, predatory gaze directly upon Chun Jie and Xiao Banru. To her, these two awakened individuals were nothing more than rare, exquisite delicacies. And so, having had her revenge, she set her sights on devouring them both. In her mind, they were surely more nutritious than consuming 1,000 ordinary people. Zhao Xiaolu, I think you've lost your mind, Chun Jie muttered, tightening his grip on the Kaitian axe. To be honest, he hadn't planned on a confrontation if she had simply left them alone. Before transforming into this monster, after all, Zhao Xiaolu had been a rather unfortunate soul. But now that she truly intended to hunt them, the situation had changed completely. He did the math quickly. In a case like this, he would simply have to take her head. Hee, delicious food, she laughed fiercely, seemingly not hearing a single word he said. Long, razor-sharp claws erupted from her fingertips as she lunged toward Chun Jie's position. As she clawed at the empty air, Chun Jie let out a cold snort and raised his axe. He swung horizontally, and we see the sheer power of the blow shake the very air of the classroom. The atmosphere crackled with the force of it until, thump, the Kaitian axe struck head-on. It collided with Zhao Xiaolu's claws, sending a shower of sparks flying in every direction. Feeling the massive impact, she was forced back 2 steps, her feet leaving deep gouges in the floor. Her fingers trembled slightly, and her prized claws were now mostly shattered and broken. Seeing her beloved claws ruined, Zhao Xiaolu immediately spiraled into a state of pure, unbridled madness. "How dare you hurt me?" she shrieked, her voice twisted with rage. "Everyone who hurts me must die." Zhao Xiaolu threw her head back and roared, as if she had suddenly cast Qinjie as the latest villain in her long history of being bullied. In her fractured mind, her fury could only be satisfied by one thing: Qinjie had to die. She unhinged her blood-stained jaw, and we see a strange, dark ripple pulsing deep within her throat. A moment later, thick strands of pale, white silk began to erupt from her mouth like a nightmare. The webbing was coated in a viscous, pale green fluid that hissed with corrosive power. This was her unique mutation, a deadly spiderweb attack that signaled the end for most of her victims. The silk expanded into a massive, suffocating net, lunging directly toward Qinjie's position. A flicker of panic crossed Qinjie's eyes, and he began to circulate his internal energy at a frantic pace. With such a massive attack in this cramped classroom, evasion was, for all intents and purposes, impossible. And so, he decided to take this opportunity to test the limits of his own strength. Regarding the talent he had awakened, we see a golden aura beginning to rise rapidly from his body. In no time at all, that shimmering yellow breath completely enveloped him in a protective glow. Focusing everything into the Kaitian axe, Qinjie raised the massive weapon high toward the ceiling. The surrounding space began to vibrate, and it felt as though the entire building was starting to groan and shake. Desks rattled violently across the floor, and the nearby windows shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. Just as the webbing was about to swallow him whole, Qinjie finally brought the axe down with a devastating swing. The Kaitian axe released an astonishing power, crashing directly into the center of the oncoming web. Even though the silk was as thick as a human thigh, it was sliced through like a cucumber before his blade. In a mere instant, the webbing was torn apart, proving utterly incapable of blocking his path. With a heavy grunt, after slicing through the webbing, the Kaitian axe struck Zhao Xiaolu directly. A thunderous sound echoed through the room as Zhao Xiaolu's body was caught in the path of the blow. Qinjie sliced her right through the shoulder, and we see a torrent of blood erupting from the wound. Zhao Xiaolu let out a miserable, piercing scream, having suffered a truly devastating blow. Deep down, the only thing she wanted now was to find a way to escape. Suddenly, a violent wave of mental fluctuations began to radiate from her fractured mind. The ordinary students nearby clutched their heads in agony, collapsing to the floor as they struggled with the pain. Because he was at the center of it all, Qinjie felt a momentary wave of dizziness wash over him. To be honest, this was the very first time he had ever faced a direct mental assault. Meanwhile, the monsters outside, driven mad by Zhao Xiaolu's mental screams, burst into the room desperate to tear Qinjie apart. Seeing the monsters rushing toward Qinjie, Xiaoban Ro's gaze turned ice-cold as she prepared to defend him. As she gripped the Qinglin's sword, sparks of lightning began to crackle and dance around the blade. Before the monsters could even get close, Xiaoban Ro moved like a ghostly shadow, trailing lightning the size of a python. She lunged at the monsters with a roar. After absorbing that golden core, she was clearly far more powerful than before. The lightning alone incinerated 4 or 5 monsters instantly, and then she followed up with a sweeping strike of her sword. With that single motion, she managed to cut down a massive number of the remaining creatures. To her, these monsters were no more difficult to deal with than slicing through soft vegetables. Once the lightning faded, we see that Xiaoban Ro had completely cleared the hallway of any threats. She simply would not allow anything to exist that might cause even the slightest trouble for Qinjie. She felt, in that moment, that Qinjie was beginning to have complete control over her very soul. "Go to your death in peace," he muttered toward Zhao Xiaolu, who was already gravely wounded. But with a sudden surge of unknown strength, she tried to strike Qinjie from behind. "You don't actually think your fragile mental control can truly master me, do you?" And just like that, Qinjie, who had seemed dazed only a moment ago, suddenly snapped back to his senses. 2 powerful Xian-Wan auras erupted from his body, swirling around him with intensity. This, we learn, was another of Qinjie's hidden talents, the power of Wazafinen. Wazafinen, the legendary Panga lineage that once separated the heavens from the earth. It possesses the power to separate clarity from chaos, easily dispelling any form of falsehood. Against a force like this, Zhao Xiaolu's weak mental control didn't stand much of a chance. In fact, if Qinjie weren't still testing his talents, her mental grip wouldn't even be worthy of touching him. As soon as the Xian-Wan aura emerged, Qinjie immediately regained his full sobriety. Even his eyes seemed to burn with a light much brighter than before. "How is this possible?" she gasped. "My mental control. It is the strongest among all mutants of my kind. And besides, I can even command ordinary monsters to do my bidding." Zhao Xiaolu watched in utter disbelief, wondering how he could have possibly dissipated her power. Fueled by her deep resentment, her mental power was actually quite high-ranking for an early-stage mutant. Ordinary awakened ones hit by such an attack might sleep for days, yet Qinjie was only dazed for a second. The fact that he shook it off so easily left her completely stunned. Chun Jie offered a faint smile. He didn't need to explain, as the Kaitian axe in his hand would provide the answer. A single surge of energy was infused into the Kaitian axe. Chun Jie bent his knees, and in the very next instant, a yellow flash of light erupted. Zhao Xiaolu, who was already barely holding on, was transformed into a rain of blood in a heartbeat. Fragments of her remains were scattered across the interior of the classroom. Chun Jie had finished it. He had put an end to Zhao Xiaolu and her insidious mental attacks. He killed her with only 2 strikes of his axe. To be honest, Chun Jie is simply too powerful. Da Xiao isn't bad either. We might have once thought those two were a match made in heaven. At that moment, many of the classmates present finally began to regain their senses. They realized Chun Jie couldn't be their enemy. In this apocalyptic world of monsters, they had no powers of their own. And so, they immediately began to flatter Chun Jie and Xiao Banru. They hoped that if the two still valued their old friendships, there might be a chance for them to survive. Chapter 7. Advancing to the peak of the second stage. After the rain of blood settled, we see something left behind in Zhao Xiaolu's original position. A white crystal appeared, another item, no doubt, capable of enhancing one's strength. At the same time, 2 dark auras began to coil and twist in the open space. This black mist seemed to be the physical manifestation of Zhao Xiaolu's resentment before she died. She wondered why this was happening, telling herself she simply wasn't good enough. Consumed by hatred, she died with her eyes wide open, refusing to find peace. She cursed them all, wishing for everyone to meet a bitter and painful end. She promised to wait for them in hell, and as her voice faded, those 2 black auras lingered. They also rushed out through the window, eventually dissipating into this world. Chun Jie retracted the Kaitian axe into his hand and let out a soft sigh. Xiao Jie, are you okay? You weren't hurt anywhere, were you? Xiao Banru nervously grabbed Chun Jie's hand, checking it over with great care. When Chun Jie was being controlled and was about to be caught by Zhao Xiaolu, her heart was in her throat. I'm fine, Chun Jie said, gently patting Xiao Banru on the head. He realized that this girl still cared for him just as much as she had in his previous life. After comforting Xiao Banru, Chun Jie picked up the crystal left behind by Zhao Xiaolu's death. Within the white of this crystal, we see a faint trace of red light beginning to reveal itself. Based on his memories of his past life, this should be a beginner-level spiritual essence. Chun Jie also roughly remembered how the quality of spiritual essence was categorized. The quality, from low to high, is divided into low level and beginner level, then mid-level and high level, and this was the spiritual essence Chun Jie now held. Knowing it could improve his strength, Chun Jie held it tight and focused his thoughts. He began to absorb it, and a white light started to seep into Chun Jie's body. Suddenly, Chun Jie felt refreshed throughout his entire being, down to every single cell. It was as if he were breathing again, like the earth returning to life in the spring. The energy within his body increased significantly, which, naturally, was exactly what he needed. It is no wonder, really, considering it was a beginner-level spiritual essence. Suddenly, it pushed him forward to the second level, the very pinnacle of the awakened. Because his body carries the talent of the chaos, Xianhuan physique, the improvement he gains after absorbing spiritual essence is far superior to that of others. To be honest, absorbing even a primary spiritual essence makes him significantly stronger than one might expect. An ordinary person would likely only reach the primary second level of the awakened. He, however, improved directly to the very pinnacle of that second level. And yet, as his awakened level rises, the amount of spiritual essence required will only continue to grow. Sir, what should we do next? Xiao Banru looked around at their immediate surroundings. Everywhere they looked, the environment was littered with blood corpses. Taking Chun Jie's arm, she took a breath, trying to steady herself. This terrifying and bizarre situation was something she was encountering for the very first time. Deep down, she realized she had no plan at all for what their next step should be. We have already awakened. What we must do now is continue to improve ourselves. In this apocalypse, an awakened possesses great abilities, but they are also the most coveted food for the monsters. As the apocalypse progresses, the monsters that constantly hunt humans and their own kind will continue to evolve. The creatures we encounter will only become stronger and more dangerous. To survive, we must keep getting stronger, he told her. As he spoke, Chun Jie's eyes flashed with a faint golden light. The apocalypse is a cruel place, ruled entirely by the law of the jungle. To survive, they must strive to improve themselves at every possible opportunity. Otherwise, the only alternative is to hide in the sewers for the rest of their lives, eventually ending up as food in a monster's mouth. As she listened to Chun Jie's words, Xiao Banru seemed to sink deep into thought. How exactly was she supposed to improve? To be honest, she didn't quite understand yet. She only knew she had to protect Chun Jie, eliminating any existence that dared to threaten him. Kill them all. Yes, that seemed like a perfectly reasonable plan to her. Meanwhile, the scent of blood from Zhao Xiaolu's corpse began to drift through the air. It quickly caught the attention of the school's monsters, as the flesh of a higher-level creature is a rare prize. Since she had evolved into a superior monster herself, she had become a rare tonic for the others. And so, drawn by that scent, the creatures began closing in on the classroom where Chun Jie stood. It appeared that a massive horde of monsters was on its way. Chunjia took Xia Banru's hand, deciding it was time for them to make their exit. Chunjia, take me with you. My father is the director of the Wang Yao Group. If you protect me, I guarantee you will enjoy infinite wealth and glory. Huang Tian, the class's resident rich kid, stood up and promised him all the money he could desire. We should remember that Chunjia School is considered a very high-level university. Wealthy students are common here, and Huang Tian's family truly does possess massive assets. He usually arrives at school in his family's Ferrari, which tells you everything you need to know. However, in the eyes of this young master, everything still revolved around money. Deep down, he believed that money could solve any problem, even this one. It was almost funny, really. The world had ended, and he was still talking about bank accounts. Do you really think money is still useful? Chunjia asked with a cold, mocking smile. This Huang Tian is truly naive, especially when we consider his reaction to Chunjia's attitude. Huang Tian, who was far too accustomed to being arrogant, simply couldn't swallow his pride. Chunjia, you're nothing but a poor devil, he spat out, unable to help himself. Your parents died early, and you have to work part-time just to afford this school. Huang Tian hadn't even finished his sentence when Chunjia's expression turned ice-cold. Suddenly, Huang Tian was so terrified that his voice caught in his throat, and he finally woke up to reality. He realized that if Chunjia wanted to, he could completely annihilate him in a single instant. Do you really want to die that badly? Then I'll send you on your way first. Chunjia reached out his hand and firmly gripped Huang Tian's head. His face became fierce as he gave it a gentle, yet decisive, twist. In the very next second, Huang Tian's head had spun completely around, his eyes bulging out. His tongue hung out, and he was left completely without life, a grim end to a wealthy life. The classmates nearby, seeing this scene, recoiled in terror and stared at Chunjia with pure horror. To the Chunjia we see now, killing them would be as easy as crushing an ant. It was as simple as that. After disposing of Huang Tian, Chunjia led Xia Banru away. Stepping through the classroom door, the two of them finally made their exit. What should we do? No, we have to find a way to survive, the students whispered. They wondered if following Chunjia was their only real hope of staying alive. In a situation like this, they realized their only option was to form a team together. Otherwise, to be perfectly honest, they would likely just end up as food for the monsters. After a brief discussion, the classmates grabbed some table legs and brooms from the classroom and followed after Chunjia. Noticing the group trailing behind them, Chunjia didn't bother to drive them away. For one thing, they were his old classmates after all, even if the bond was a bit thin. He decided to let them follow, provided they didn't do anything to make him angry. Secondly, with such a large crowd, they were bound to attract plenty of monsters, weren't they? By using his classmates as bait, Chunjia could take the opportunity to kill the monsters and level up. After dealing with a few monsters in the hallway, Chunjia reached the school convenience store and gathered all the useful food. As he packed his backpack, the other classmates also realized they needed to search for supplies. However, they only dared to pick up the items that Chunjia didn't want for himself. They essentially looted the entire store, filling 2 large bags to the brim. Only then was Chunjia ready to leave, just as the former sports commissioner, Lin Xiu, came running over to flatter him. Brother Chun, I'm strong. Let me help you carry those things, he offered eagerly. He insisted that Chunjia and his lady should just focus on walking, nodding and bowing with a face full of pleas. Seeing him like that, and since the bags weren't heavy for him anyway, Chunjia handed them over. Of course, if the man dared to show even the slightest hint of rebellion, Chunjia would annihilate him instantly. With that settled, the group from Class 3 left the supply area behind. But just as he was stepping out of the convenience store, Chunjia found himself surrounded by a new group of people. In this next chapter of the conflict, Chunjia looked directly at the newcomers blocking his path. The person leading them was Zhao, the notorious leader of Class 6. This Zhao had always been arrogant, a well-known school bully who took pleasure in intimidating the younger students. He had been disciplined by the school many times in the past. Now that the world has ended, however, his behavior has only grown worse. You must want to die, he sneered. Why don't you just hand those things over obediently? One of his lackeys chimed in, boasting that their boss had awakened special abilities. According to him, even the monsters were no match for Zhao's new power. The small henchman beside Zhao pointed aggressively at Lin Xiu, who was standing near Chunjia. Zhao had successfully awakened his talent, helping many students from Class 6 escape the initial chaos. After that, he had wasted no time in recruiting the surviving students to serve him. Lin Xiu looked toward Chunjia, unsure of how to handle the situation. He clutched the 2 large bags of food tightly and turned his gaze back to Chunjia. Without Chunjia's explicit instructions, he didn't dare hand the supplies over to the Class 6 group. You truly are arrogant, Chunjia remarked calmly. I gathered these things myself. He frowned, asking why on earth he should give them anything at all. To be honest, what he disliked most were people like Zhao who took pleasure in bullying the weak. If you won't do this the easy way, Zhao threatened, you'll have to do it the hard way. Zhao's face twisted with rage. He clenched his fists, and suddenly, 2 enormous wings sprouted behind him. Upon closer inspection, we can see strange white spots revealed on the surface of the wings. It seems Zhao must have consumed a ladybug before the apocalypse, which triggered this particular transformation. The wings behind Zhao suddenly flapped with violence, launching him forward like a falling meteor. He charged directly at Chun Jie, whose keen observation skills allowed him to recognize the threat instantly. Chun Jie was the leader of his team, and seeing his opponent seeking his own demise, his hand trembled slightly with anticipation. In an instant, the Sky Sunderer axe appeared in his hand, ready for battle. A vast, mystical aura began to swirl around the blade of the Sky Sunderer axe. Having already reached the second level of existence, Zhao was eager to show off his newfound strength. Zhao shouted at the top of his lungs, his voice full of smug satisfaction as the muscles in his body began to writhe. They slowly tightened and compressed, making him look even more packed with raw power. Chun Jie stared Zhao down without a hint of panic, simply tightening his grip on the Sky Sunderer axe. A flash of cold light erupted, heading straight for Zhao's arrogant face. The Sky Sunderer axe collided heavily with Zhao's iron-like hand. The solid impact rang out with a sharp, metallic clang that echoed through the air. Unable to withstand the sheer force, Zhao was pushed back, though he tried to maintain a dignified posture by standing tall. Zhao's lackeys cheered loudly, urging their boss to finish off Chun Jie once and for all. But they had no idea just how much pressure Zhao was actually enduring in that moment. After only that first clash, Zhao felt as if his iron fist had struck an immovable mountain. He wondered what kind of formidable power this could be, having been repelled so easily by Chun Jie's axe. His hands were trembling slightly, and with a solemn expression, he realized it was far too late to admit defeat now. If he were to surrender now, he would have no future, so he challenged the boy to try his luck again. Zhao's face tightened as he let out a forceful shout. He looked imposing, but he was really just trying to bolster his own courage. He launched his black iron fist forward, attacking Chun Jie once more. But before Chun Jie could even move, Xia Banru rushed out from the side, her body already covered in protective scales. The long sword in her hand crackled with flashing lightning, pointing directly at Zhao. Zhao felt that massive energy closing in, and he was so terrified that he broke out in a cold sweat. With no other choice, he could only throw his hands up in front of him to defend himself. With a sharp clang, Xia Banru's long sword struck Zhao's steel hand with incredible force. This attack was fierce and carried a lightning strike, burning Zhao's hands until they turned a painful red. One of Zhao's men shouted that the two of them, husband and wife, were cheating by teaming up, which was truly shameless. But Xia Banru gave him a look, and the subordinate quickly hid behind Zhao, silenced by her gaze. Chun Jie told Banru to step back and rest for a moment, insisting she leave the rest to him. He stood before her, wanting to test just how powerful his Sky Sunderer axe had become at the peak of the second level. Xia Banru called out his name in worry, seeing Chun Jie standing so firmly at the front. She said nothing more. She was willing to protect him, but she respected whatever he chose to do. Since he wanted to face this alone, she decided she would stay back and watch the situation closely. Zhao sneered, telling him not to think he'd won yet, and promised to take care of the girl once Chun Jie was dead. Even after being repelled twice, Zhao was still brimming with confidence as the hard wings on his back began to move. They trembled violently, rotating strangely toward the front to form a protective shield around him. Zhao pushed his speed to the absolute limit, and with the blessing of his ladybug talent, his body's durability increased. It was now as hard as a diamond, and Zhao simply didn't believe that broken axe could pierce his defense. He told himself that as long as Chun Jie couldn't break through, he would eventually find a chance to kill him. Chun Jie shouted, asking what kind of turtle shell this was, as he raised the Sky Sunderer axe for a devastating strike. As his rank increased, it seemed as though a mass of ancient energy was now blessing his every move. And then, quite unexpectedly, an illusory layer of energy began to manifest around the weapon. With a series of heavy thuds, the Sky Sunderer axe struck Zhao with absolute precision. Intense ripples of energy surged outward, whipping up violent gusts of wind that swept across the area. Those present who lacked special talents found themselves dazed and dizzy from the sheer force of the shockwave. After a tense moment, a sharp, distinct crack echoed through the air, a sound that changed everything. In an instant, Zhao's hardened wings were shattered into pieces, scattering like dust in the wind. His defense was broken. Even with a specialized defensive talent, he couldn't withstand Chun Jie's single, decisive strike. With his only protective skill gone, Zhao's body was suddenly left extremely vulnerable to the next blow. The Sky Sunderer axe swung down vertically, and in one clean motion, it managed to take off one of Zhao's arms. Fresh blood splattered across the plains, making it clear to everyone that their leader had lost. The men were in shock, knowing their boss was a formidable second rank awakened. They wondered how it was even possible for him to be defeated by Chun Jie in a single move. Panic set in as they asked themselves what to do, since they possessed no talent abilities of their own. In this dying world, they knew that without their leader, they were likely doomed to perish as well. Desperate, they began to call out, begging their boss to find the strength to stand up once more. Behind Zhao, some of his subordinates continued to cheer for him, hoping for a miracle. Others, however, were already quietly preparing to submit themselves to Chunjie's authority. Zhao finally spoke, admitting his defeat and desperately appealing to Chunjie's sense of generosity. Clutching his wound in agony, he begged for mercy, willing to do anything just to survive another day. To be honest, he was now willing to cast aside every shred of his dignity if it meant staying alive. What happened to all that arrogance from a moment ago? Chunjie asked, honestly preferring his enemy's earlier, untamable attitude. He gripped the Sky Sunderer axe firmly, closing the distance between himself and Zhao step by step. We see that for Chunjie, mercy was never an option. Having lived 2 lives, his heart had become as cold and hard as stone. In this dying world, leaving enemies alive behind you is a habit one simply cannot afford to keep. As Chunjie drew closer, the expression on Zhao's face shifted into one of absolute, soul-crushing terror. He stammered in disbelief, asking if Chunjie truly dared to kill him right then and there. He tried one last threat, shouting about his brother's high-ranking position within the Qinglan gang. Zhao screamed with every bit of strength he had left, but it was a pity, really. Chunjie's Sky Sunderer axe has no ears, and it certainly wasn't interested in listening to excuses. With a gentle, almost effortless sweep, he brought the blade down and severed Zhao's head. Chapter 9. Ambushed by the zombie hordes. As Zhao's head rolled across the dusty ground, his subordinates stood frozen in a state of stunned disbelief. They watched the scene unfold, unable to process that their former boss had been finished with a single strike. At the end of the day, however, these followers were nothing more than frightened students. And as it turned out, their loyalty to Zhao wasn't nearly as deep as he had imagined it to be. In this apocalyptic world, the only real question is, who is strong enough to follow? The small group, consisting of about 5 or 6 people, began to murmur amongst themselves. Immediately, they dropped to their knees before Chunjie, addressing him as their new great boss. They claimed they had only been seduced by Zhao's lies, and were glad the man was finally dead. Now, they begged for his acceptance, pledging to follow him wherever he might lead them next. Yes, it seems Great Boss Chen's axe swings with an incomparably vigorous force that demands respect. We see the sudden fervor of these subordinates as they scramble to find a new protector. From this moment on, they promised to follow his every word to the letter. They claimed to have finally realized the true majesty of the great Chunjie. One even shouted that he had seen this greatness in him a long time ago. They begged for a single chance, insisting their only desire was to serve him faithfully. To survive, these students were using every bit of social cunning they had ever learned. Chunjie didn't say much in response. He simply gave a small, silent nod. To be honest, he didn't care about them, but if they were willing to follow, he would let them. In his mind, the best use for them was simply to attract more monsters for him to hunt. He told himself that if he waited until the situation stabilized later on, it wouldn't be entirely impossible to use them to build his own personal force. The group was overjoyed, thanking the Great Boss Chun for his supposed mercy. They began to chant his name, Great Boss Chun. The cry went up again, Great Boss Chun, and again, Great Boss Chun. The air was filled with their desperate shouts of Great Boss Chun, Great Boss Chun. He knew that to improve his strength quickly, he had to constantly challenge the strongest monsters. As for this group of people, he decided it was best to keep them close by for now. They would be useful for luring monsters and clearing the path toward the next boss. No matter how high the talent awakened by his ex-wife's boss might be, he still needs to reach at least the 3rd level of strength. Otherwise, as we can imagine, he won't be so easy to kill. Thanking Boss Chun with a gratitude that seemed lifelong, several new students rushed into the convenience store like a pack of hungry wolves. The construction of the spiritual fountain began, and 3 minutes later, Chunjie led this small group of people out. Together, they embarked on the long road toward the hospital. At this moment, we see only a single, blood-red moon hanging ominously in the sky. However, there was still just enough light for humans to make out the landscape outside. The roads were already in complete chaos, with various wrecked vehicles blocking the path at every turn. Occasionally, they saw monsters chasing humans, but since they were only ordinary creatures, Chunjie didn't make a single move. Interfering has never been a habit of his. While nearby, 2 high-rise buildings flickered with urgent breaking news. It appeared that many humans and animals had already undergone grotesque mutations. These mutated beings rarely retained any sense of reason. To be perfectly honest, they were little more than beasts. Experts were suggesting that, at this stage, it was best for everyone to hide at home and avoid wandering outside. The appearance of these deformed monsters soon alarmed the high command of the Dragon Kingdom, who reacted with immediate urgency. They began investigating the creatures and issued a stern alert to the public. It was a pity, really. Chunjie knew that by the time a method to inhibit the mutations was found, most humans would already be dead. However, he told himself he didn't have to worry about that just yet. As we look toward the later stages of the apocalypse, it will become increasingly difficult to survive alone. Only those humans who constantly push themselves to the extreme will even have the qualification to survive. They might even use this abnormal mutation to achieve the legendary gift of eternal life. We see Chunjie leading the team through the streets, steadily advancing toward the hospital. They had only been walking for a short while when Chunjie heard a desperate cry for help. Looking back, he saw a smoking car pinning down a young man wearing glasses. The man's expression was fierce and, to be quite honest, extremely terrifying to behold. Upon spotting Chunjie and the others, he used every ounce of his strength to scream for assistance. Chunjie and his companions simply looked at one another, yet none of them dared to move. In the past, the more enthusiastic members of the group would have acted immediately. They would have reached out to help, but this is the end of the world, and enthusiasm is a luxury. They knew that following Chunjie was their only lifeline, and kindness alone could not save them now. Meanwhile, Chunjie simply stood there, watching the man's performance with a cold, detached gaze. The man shouted at them, asking if they weren't students and why they were being so indifferent. His face, which had been twisted in pain, suddenly shifted as he began snarling at the group. Immediately after his outburst, his body began to undergo a grotesque mutation right before our eyes. We see his eyes, which had seemed so soft and vulnerable just moments ago, begin to turn a fierce, blood-red color while his ordinary hands started to change. Terrifying bluish scales began to sprout across his skin, and slowly but surely, claws grew from his fingers until his head finally transformed into that of a hideous lizard. It was a lizard monster, a human who had mutated entirely into a reptilian nightmare. Judging by its aura alone, Chunjie felt this creature was far stronger than the previous Zhao Xiaolu. The monster laughed, gloating that with so many students present, he could finally enjoy a feast. The lizard monster looked greedily at Chunjie and the others, letting out a terrifying laugh as if, in the very next second, he could swallow everyone present one by one. Brother Chun, why is he only mutating now? Shouldn't he have mutated a long time ago? Why was he still in a normal state before? Lin Xiu, who was carrying the luggage, asked with genuine curiosity. Having followed Chunjie for a while, he was much calmer than the others when faced with such a scene. This must be a natural ability of the lizard monster. Chunjie replied with total indifference. At least, that was his assumption. This lizard monster was likely capable of mimicking humans, transforming into whatever shape he desired. This talent, if used for sneak attacks, could still be quite useful. But in actual combat, it wasn't much of a debate. In a frontal assault, it offered no real advantage. Seeing that Chunjie and the others were still calmly discussing his talents, the lizard monster seemed to feel provoked. This group of people didn't fear him in the slightest. He felt that, as a second-order peak monster, he was being deeply insulted. Be obedient and become my dinner. The lizard monster's face turned a deep green as he swept his right hand out. He sent nearby vehicles flying through the air. Then, standing firm, he gripped the ground. Closing in on the group at extreme speed, he first targeted Xia Banru. A beauty with such soft skin surely had the best flavor. As the monster reverted to its true form, Xia Banru felt him rushing toward her and shouted out in anger. Then, above her head, a pair of dragon horns glowed in a line, flickering with silver arcs of light. A small cyan smoke dragon rushed out from her side, twisting and intertwining as cyan-white electric arcs flickered continuously. And so, we see Xia Banru invoke her battle spirit, marking a sharp turn in the conflict. What a magnificent bird, I like it very much. In a little while, I shall enjoy devouring you slowly. The lizard monster snorted and let out a laugh. He was quite confident in himself, wasn't he? His dark green tail swept towards Xia Banru, carrying an immense and destructive power. But before the monster's strike could even touch her, a flash of lightning illuminated the scene. In an instant, Xia Banru vanished from the spot, leaving only the hum of energy behind. The massive tail slammed into a nearby jeep instead, immediately smashing the vehicle into 1,000 pieces. Even though she had only recently awakened her powers, her experiences at the school had changed her. Her reactions were now incredibly sharp as she shouted, "You ugly monster! Die!" she cried out, raising her sword toward the sky with a delicate but firm voice. She commanded Xiaoye to entangle him, and the response was nearly instantaneous. The spirit she called Xiaoye trembled and transformed itself into a pure bolt of lightning. In a heartbeat, it tightly coiled around the monstrous creature, trapping him where he stood. What a despicable woman! Let me go! The creature roared in frustration. The monster gnashed his teeth and struggled constantly, but he had already reached his limit. To be honest, it was unlikely that a creature of his level could easily break free from such a spirit. It was then that Xia Banru activated her talent, the extinguishing divine thunder. Suddenly, dense clusters of lightning began to rain down from the heavens above. The energy connected directly to the blade of her sword as she expertly flicked her wrist. The long sword, now infused with the terrifying power of celestial thunder, lunged straight for the monster. Celestial thunder. The Western monster's eyes widened in pure horror as he watched the lightning closing in. He had been lurking in this place for some time, easily dealing with any awakened humans he encountered. He had devoured them all, but he had never met anyone quite as formidable as Xia Banru. To be honest, he never expected her to actually be able to summon celestial thunder. From her vantage point in the air, Xia Banru watched the monster's expression turn to one of absolute terror. The corners of her mouth couldn't help but curl into a small, satisfied smile. Deep down, she knew this was all thanks to Brother Shinji and what he did before the world ended. He had fed her Zuikin. Otherwise, she realized she would be something very different right now. She would have been a little lamb at the mercy of others, a thought she dismissed with a quiet huff. The long sword struck with immense force, slamming directly into the western monster's body. A blinding white light erupted from the point where the blade met the creature's flesh. The energy radiated outward until, after a long moment, the brilliant white light finally began to dissipate. Xia Banru gripped her sword tightly, staring ahead to see the results of her strike. As it turns out, the monster hadn't died yet, which was a bit of a surprise, wasn't it? The creature remained hunched over, his chest heaving as he gasped heavily for air. After taking that direct hit from Xia Banru, the scales across his body were stained with traces of blood. He felt as though every scale on his body was about to be stripped away while he was still alive. Fortunately for him, he possessed a specific talent, the Red Flame Scale Armor Awakening. This Red Flame Scale armor can greatly enhance his defense for a short period of time. Furthermore, by feeding on humans in this area, the monster had already reached the peak of the second level. He wasn't going to be that easy to kill. "Damn it, how dare you try to kill me," he snarled. Before the mutation, he had always been oppressed by his boss, and now he had become something entirely inhuman. A monster that was neither human nor ghost, yet still facing oppression. He simply wasn't willing to accept it. He wanted everyone to die, and so, the monster fell into a state of pure, unadulterated mania. His facial muscles twisted into something extremely grotesque as a deep, resentful aura began to linger around him. The muscles of his body also began to surge and grow, fueled by this sudden, violent madness. In just a few seconds, the monster grew much larger than before, his eyes glowing a deep blood red. As he stared at Xia Banru, we see that his entire being was consumed by nothing but resentment. The monster had clearly gone mad, and the onlookers wondered if Xia Banru was still a match for him. Others disagreed, certain that since Xia Banru could summon celestial thunder, she would surely finish him off. They believed it was simple, cheering for her to find the courage to defeat this hideous creature. While the others were full of confidence in Xia Banru, only Cheng Jie noticed the truth after that last attack. Deep down, Xia Banru didn't have much strength left at all. Her combat experience was still quite limited, and she had used her strongest killing move right at the start. She had assumed it was a guaranteed kill, never expecting her opponent's realm to be so much higher than her own. To make matters worse, the creature possessed a natural talent for defense. Not only did the attack fail to kill her opponent, but it had placed her in a very passive situation. "You want to win? You're exhausted looking like that, aren't you?" the monster taunted. Now it was his turn, and the monster cruelly licked his claws in anticipation. As it turns out, this monster possessed an almost abnormal capacity for recovery. After only a brief moment to catch his breath, his physical strength had already recovered by half. And so, we go again. Xia Banru refused to show any weakness, reactivating her powers to summon the clouds and rain. A white cloud spread out from beneath her feet, carrying her upward as she rushed toward the monster at high speed. This attack, however, was quite obviously much weaker than her previous effort. "Humph, do you really think you're still a match for me now?" the monster sneered. He snorted coldly, boasting that he had reached the peak of the second stage. Both of his claws lashed out simultaneously with lightning-fast speed. In just an instant, he was a blur of motion, appearing right in front of Xia Banru. Seeing that the claws were about to seize her, Xia Banru had no choice but to block with her sword. A heavy, metallic thud echoed through the air from the force of the collision. Xia Banru was violently thrown back, her feet barely maintaining contact with the ground. She skidded across the earth for quite a distance before finally managing to come to a halt. We have to wonder, how is this creature's recovery capacity so high? To be honest, both his resilience and his raw strength were becoming completely abnormal. "Die!" he roared, as Xia Banru found herself unable to mount a resistance. The monster let out a scream of excitement and lunged toward her once more. "It isn't your turn to be arrogant just yet," Cheng Jie's deep, resonant voice rang out. The Kaitian axe flew through the air at that exact moment, cutting directly across the monster's path. Originally, Cheng Jie had stayed back to watch, hoping to give Xia Banru a chance for some real combat experience. But now that Xia Banru was at a clear disadvantage, the situation had changed. She had no choice but to act, while the monster snarled, asking if this brat really dared to provoke him. "Be careful," he threatened. "I will tear you to pieces with a single move." The monster roared furiously. Seeing no strong energy fluctuations from Cheng Jie, he dismissed him as a simple, awakened human. "Oh," Cheng Jie responded quite calmly, showing no sign of intimidation whatsoever. And then, an aura of mystical rings rose up, surrounding Cheng Jie's body in a display of power. His aura continued to climb steadily, growing more intense with every passing second. The monster felt that Cheng Jie's aura was now equal to his own, and he couldn't help but feel a sudden surge of panic. Realizing they were both at the peak of the second stage, Cheng Jie ignored the question and simply raised the Kaitian axe. He closed the distance between himself and the monster with extreme, almost blinding speed. Without a single word, he unleashed the Kaitian strike, aiming the axe directly at the creature's head. The powerful fluctuations of energy were so heavy they actually suppressed the monster, pinning him in place. "You cannot kill me," the monster roared, desperately activating his Scarlet Flame Scale armor talent once again. It was a pity, really. We must remember that Chang Jie possesses a rare S-rank talent. Furthermore, his own cultivation had already reached the absolute peak of the Second Order. The sheer power of this axe strike was far greater than any thunder attack Xia Banru could have mustered. It was significantly more powerful, and as the axe descended, the pressure increased with every inch it fell. The monster felt the cold, intense shadow of death looming over him until the Kaitian axe finally made contact. Suddenly, he felt as though every cell in his body was being compressed and shattered by the axe's raw power. The spiritual armor on his body emitted a brilliant golden light, focusing all its energy toward his heart for protection. He resisted with every ounce of his strength to protect his core, but to be honest, he could only hold out for a very short time. With a sickening squelch, the razor-sharp Kaitian axe sliced through the monster's body in an instant. The creature barely had time for a final scream before Chang Jie split him clean in two. Immediately afterward, we see a sphere of purple light leap from the monster's remains. A new talent was within reach. Chang Jie recognized that specific type of aura immediately. This was a rare treasure, the kind used to enhance one's own innate talents. As he reached out, the Lihong Min info energy emerged, and he gently guided the purple cluster toward it. This energy was incredibly dominant, and as it appeared, everyone nearby was momentarily blinded by its radiance. Once the Lihong Min info energy locked onto the purple sphere, it rushed forward with an eager hiss, completely enveloping the purple light. In no time at all, the purple cluster vanished without a trace, fully devoured by the Lihong Min info. With the swallowing complete, the aura grew even stronger, feeding a portion of that energy back into Chang Jie. And here things take a strange turn. Chang Jie felt something new within him and tightened his grip. With a single thought, a layer of small scales suddenly began to grow across his skin. They emitted a faint yellow light, the very same defensive talent the lizard monster had used. Deep down, Chang Jie was stunned to realize the Lihong Min info could do more than just provide energy. It had actually transferred the enemy's talent directly to him, granting him a brand new power. Normally, a person is limited to the talent they receive at their awakening and their battle spirit. Gaining new talents like this meant he would have an extra trick up his sleeve for every future fight. "Boss, you're incredible," his companion cheered. "You finished it with just one swing." The ugly monster was dealt with, and to his followers, Chang Jie had never seemed more powerful. Didn't he want to eat us? "Big brother, could you let us have the body of this lizard monster? I can make a fine barbecue." These classmates began praising Chang Jie the moment they saw an opening. We see they understand their situation perfectly. There are man-eating monsters lurking everywhere now. At the same time, if they have a decent physique, they risk being crushed by other awakened ones. To be honest, their only real hope of surviving this is Chang Jie. As long as Chang Jie is willing to lead them for a day, they can live one more day in this apocalypse. "The body of this lizard monster, eat it if you want," he replied with a dismissive wave. Chang Jie waved his hand. In truth, for humans living through the end of the world, consuming monster meat can offer certain benefits, making their physiques stronger than those of ordinary people. However, Chang Jie felt a natural resistance to these creatures and had no intention of eating them himself. "Thank you, brother," one cried, the kind of loyalty that usually ends in dying before one's duty is done. He pulled out a pocket knife and rushed toward the lizard monster, beginning to butcher the body with frantic energy. They showed no fear even before such a fierce beast. To survive this world, one must be brave. After a few minutes, the group had dissected the monster and sorted the different cuts of meat. By this time, the sky was gradually darkening, and the surrounding light began to fade into twilight. "Let's rest in the hotel next door," Chang Jie decided, quickly clearing out a few common monsters inside. The place was ready for check-in. He took a room on the second floor, while the other students, fearing for their personal safety, preferred to sleep in the hallway rather than venture to other floors. Just after entering his room, Chang Jie heard the unmistakable sound of firearms coming from outside. He pulled back the curtains and looked into the distance, where a small armed squad was moving. They were continuously spraying bullets at the monsters that were lunging toward them. The armed squad retreated toward the hotel while firing, eventually moving away from the windows and staying on the second floor. "Boss, there are too many monsters, we can't kill them all," one of them shouted over the noise. He realized with a sinking feeling that he was likely running out of ammunition. They desperately needed to find cover and regroup if they wanted to survive the night. Deep down, he was certain that if this continued, he was going to die right there. "Retreat, keep firing, don't listen to anything else," the leader barked, trying to maintain order. There was a hotel just behind them, a place they could use as a base to defend their position. They just had to find a single window of opportunity to make their escape once more. We see these people escaping through a hail of artillery fire as they retreated toward the very hotel where Chang Jie was staying. Chang Jie frowned as he watched the group from the safety of his room. To be honest, these people were leading the deformed monsters straight to him, which would only bring him more trouble. The big man leading the group pulled out 2 hand grenades and yanked the pins out with his teeth. With a sudden, powerful movement of his hand, he hurled the grenades into the middle of the monster pack. What followed was a deafening roar that shook the very air around them. It was precisely because of this explosion that the monsters, who had been attacking so frantically, suddenly faltered. The beasts were stunned for a moment, giving the squad the chance to move away from the exterior and into the center of the building. Seizing this brief window of time, the 8 members of the team burst through the hotel doors and ran inside. Some of them immediately used the hotel windows to mount machine guns and continue their barrage against the horde. Meanwhile, many of the students poked their heads out from the second floor, driven by a dangerous amount of curiosity. And here we see that they weren't alone. A scarred member of the squad immediately spotted Chung Jie's companions. After that shout, several students quickly pulled back, but it was too late. They had already been discovered. The leader of the group slammed his palm against the room's door to get their attention. He then slapped a short, fat man standing beside him, ordering him to stay behind and deal with the trailing monsters. That short man, known as Leovia, took his orders, raised his machine gun, and hurried toward the second floor. As soon as he reached the landing, he found the students huddled together around Chung Jie's room. Upon seeing several female students there, he immediately felt a surge of predatory lust. He chuckled to himself, thinking there were plenty of students here for his brothers to have some fun with. The short man licked his lips, raised his weapon, and aimed it directly at the terrified students. To be honest, where would these students have ever seen real firearms before today? They were instantly paralyzed with fear, shrinking back toward the door of Chung Jie's room. It was a crowded scene, with more and more people pressing against that single position. He wondered if there might be something valuable inside, staring curiously at the door to Chung Jie's quarters. He noticed how the students seemed to be surrounding this specific room as if guarding it. He guessed that there might be even more delightful prizes waiting for him behind that door. The short man raised his gun and began kicking the students out of his way. Bang, bang, bang. He kicked the doors several times with all his strength. When he received no answer, he grew impatient and fired 2 shots directly into the doorknob. Then, with a powerful shove, he forced the door open and burst inside. And what did he see? Chung Jie standing right there, protectively holding Xia Banru in his arms. Xia Banru was truly striking, with her fair skin and undeniable beauty. Our short, stout intruder was immediately drawn to her, his attention completely captured. To be honest, he found himself unable to look away at all. He laughed to himself, thinking that finding such a beauty meant he had hit the jackpot. Overcome with excitement, he barked at Chung Jie to get lost. He raised his weapon and aimed it directly at Chung Jie, seeing him as nothing more than a nuisance. He assumed a simple, unarmed student would be terrified enough to wet himself at the sight of a gun. But Chung Jie had a different perspective. Being held at gunpoint was the thing he hated most in this life. He glared at the short man with pure fury, remembering how often he had been threatened this way in his past life. He had been forced into so many things back then, and this man's presence made him deeply uncomfortable. His killing intent had already surfaced, even as the man sneered that he would teach him how to let the girl go. The short man wore a mocking expression, asking if he was deaf and claiming the girl for himself. In his mind, the one with the gun was the king of this new world. Chapter 12, The Extermination Squad. Chung Jie stood beside Xia Banru, deciding he didn't want to see this man's face for a second longer. He whispered a soft sentence to her, and then finally released her hand. Seeing this, the short man felt a surge of excitement, thinking the boy was finally giving in. He even complimented him, calling him a smart kid for knowing when to step aside. He then turned to Xia Banru, promising her that she would survive this apocalypse if she followed him. Xia Banru's expression remained as cold as ice, completely ignoring every word the man said. The aura around her body surged once more, and bolts of lightning began to flicker and float from her skin. Then, in an instant, she transformed into a streak of light and dashed forward. The task Chung Jie had entrusted to her was simple. She was to kill the man standing before her. She didn't hesitate for a single second. Whatever Chung Jie told her to do, she would do. She acted immediately, the thunder flashing before the short, stout man could even begin to react. He felt a sudden, sharp chill at his throat as the strike landed with lethal precision. In a gruesome display, the short man's head was sent flying upward toward the sky. However, Xia Banru didn't stop there. She was far from finished with her task. Using 2 bolts of lightning to lift the man's head, she ascended toward the second floor. The group of people who had been fighting off the monsters first caught sight of Xia Banru and were stunned by her beauty. But that admiration vanished instantly when they saw the head of the short man, and they were consumed by fury. They cried out in shock, realizing she had killed their companion, Lao Ba. The team leader roared, his eyes practically spitting fire as he stared down the barrel of Xia Banru's power. He aimed his weapon at her, convinced that this newcomer had brought nothing but trouble for his group. Xia Banru spoke a single, cold word of contempt before tossing the man's head directly at the leader's feet. Seeing the remains of his comrade, the team leader trembled with pure rage and pulled the trigger without hesitation. The sound of gunfire echoed through the air as he unleashed a desperate volley of shots. Streaks of fire and lead rushed toward Xia Banru in a frantic attempt to take her down. Unfortunately for them, these ordinary firearms were far too weak to pose any real threat to someone like her. To be honest, in her eyes, the speed of the bullets was so slow they were almost standing still. Time seemed to slow down for her. With a few slight, graceful movements, she easily dodged every single bullet one by one. "Damn it, she's an awakened monster, big brother," one of them shouted in a panic. The skinny man at his side urgently warned them that they needed to retreat immediately. Unfortunately, the team leader was far too focused on his weapon to listen to reason. He was beyond hearing anything. The gun in his hand continued to fire without stopping, fueled by blind rage. "You can die now," Xia Banru's light voice whispered softly, right into his ear. It was as if she were calmly announcing a death sentence to the team leader. In a flash, Xia Banru's blade was drawn, the agile sword in her hand gleamed, and in the very next second, a bolt of lightning struck the team leader directly from above. The leader let out a miserable cry and collapsed to the ground instantly, his body convulsing. In a matter of moments, all signs of life had vanished, and that, as they say, was that. Then she turned her attention to his followers. One after another, Xia Banru began to harvest their lives. To be perfectly honest, the original Xia Banru had never been this cruel.